Swinburne University of Technology.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr Carolyn Beasley. Today we'll be talking with Dr Robyn Sampson, who is a research fellow from the Swinburne Institute for Social Research. Welcome, Robyn.
Thanks, Carolyn.
And today we'll be talking about postdoctoral fellowship. So can you give us a bit of an insight into what a postdoctoral fellowship is?
Sure. Well, they can vary quite a bit. The one I've been doing has been segmented by years. So it was a 1 year and then another 1 year. And in my case, I was working on some research projects that other people had got funding for. So in my case, my postdoc has been mainly about doing research on topics I like and know about, but research designed by other researchers. You can also get postdocs that are funded to do your own research. So in those cases, you actually apply to get the funding for the postdoc and get to design the research and implement it yourself. So in both cases, they're about doing research mainly. Occasionally they include teaching.
Yeah.
And depending on how big they are, they can be a bit like doing another PhD.
Wow. But in an even better way.
That's right.
So what sort of, if you get down to the nitty-gritty, I suppose, what sort of things would you do on a daily basis as part of that role?
Sure. Well, I find with my research projects, which are all social research projects, I tend to go through phases of work. So when I'm out interviewing people, that's a lot more kind of phone calls, organising meetings, going out, doing interviews, that kind of thing. And then there's a lot of sitting at the desk, I guess, while I'm analysing the interviews that I've done and writing up the results in papers and reports and that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's conferences and other sorts of meetings as well.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Post-conference drinks, yeah. Responsibly consumed, of course. Would you do things like ethics clearances for your
Sure.
manager as well? What do you call the person that you work for?
I guess I call them my supervisor. But I'm not sure everyone would call them they could just call them their boss.
Yeah, I was curious. I was trying to work out. I thought, what do we call them? It's more like not line manager, project manager, because I suppose every project is different and you have a different relationship with the person you're working under, who's the lead researcher or the central investigator, the CI we might call them, according to what project you're doing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I guess technically within the Swinburne structure, she's my manager. For the key project I've been working on. She was also my PhD supervisor or a co-supervisor, so I just continue using that language perhaps. And that's quite common actually. A lot of people get postdocs with people they've worked with before, including supervisors, so that's probably not uncommon. But yes, it depends on the size of the project that the person has funding for, what role you take within that. So in my case, I was tasked with creating a sort of sub-project. So it had to fit within the wider research program, but I was responsible for the designing the study, applying for ethics, implementing it, doing the interviews, doing the analysis, and writing up, but all in kind of a collaborative approach.
Wow, so you had a lot of autonomy really there.
Yes, in my case it was a very autonomous project. I've also in previous roles, not as a postdoc but as a research assistant or research officer, done work on bigger research projects, and some of those roles have had a less autonomy because I really was implementing someone else's research plan. So less design and more consultation about decisions.
Sure.
But I guess that reflects partly the pre-PhD, post-PhD kind of expectations of what you'd be capable of doing, really.
Sure, yeah. And I suppose it's a good thing to bear in mind to always try to develop and maintain a good relationship with your supervisor when you're doing your PhD, because it can lead to this sort of work, and they might refer you to someone else as you go along. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also networking during your PhD is something that is hard to do perhaps, say at conferences and things like that, but I have found that there's a lot of people I've met through the course of my PhD, and because in my case I was doing research assistance work before that, that actually I feel I'm in a really good position now because I'm quite well known in this field.
Yep.
So, which is pretty good for, what is it for me, 1 year post graduation.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You have such an interesting field too. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you did in your PhD? And because you are, working quite now due to current affairs on the cutting edge of things. So I'll let you explain all of that.
Sure. So I work on asylum seeker and refugee issues, but I especially look at the issue of immigration detention. And my PhD was on alternatives to immigration detention. So I was really lucky. I was able to collaborate with an international advocacy organisation called the International Detention Coalition, and it's got members in 70 different countries. They've got about 300 members. And so I did research on alternatives to detention for them, but also as my PhD. So the partnership meant that I wrote a handbook for them that they have since been using with governments around the world.
Fantastic,
to
well
look
done.
At alternatives to detention, but I then also used the same data to write a more academic piece, obviously, in the thesis.
Sure, and your area will just yield so much work for you to come, given the enormous refugee crisis in Europe, and very interesting area.
It's what we would call a wicked problem.
Yes, we've talked about wicked problems in this series,
oh,
so well done.
There you go.
Yep.
This is certainly one of those problems that's not going to go away anytime soon. And if you broaden the scope to look at people who will be forced to migrate due to, say, climate change, it's only going to become a bigger kind of question of how to manage flows of people who can't live where they've been living anymore. So.
Amazing, incredible work.
Yeah.
So what's the difference, is there a difference between a postdoctoral fellow and a research assistant, or is perhaps a research assistant one of the roles that you do in the postdoctoral fellow?
In my head they're different. So postdoctoral research fellow would certainly have a PhD. Postdoctoral. Yeah.
It's good to clarify that. You still get questions around that.
So there's a certain level of experience that you bring to that role, and so it usually has quite a lot more autonomy, or at least a lot more responsibility. Whereas a research assistant and research officer, which are very similar sorts of roles, they could potentially have that level of responsibility. So, for instance, I worked on a really big project before I was a PhD, did my PhD. That was a longitudinal study, and we were following a group of 120 newly arrived refugee youth in Melbourne for 5 years. And so I was first hired as a research assistant, where I helped to do the interviews, and then someone left the project a year later and I became the manager for data collection. So it was actually quite a big responsibility because we had to track 120 kids, make sure we met up with them each 12 months, and did a whole series of both quantitative survey data, qualitative research methods like drawings and photos, and interviews. So in that case I had a little team who I was working with to get the work done. And I had responsibility to make sure the data was collected, and although that was still very focused on data collection, I later had some role in some of the writing up, but it wasn't my primary responsibility.
Sure.
So it was still a big job, but it wasn't the full scope of a research project.
Sure, okay.
So it was a big project, but within that, of course, it meant still big jobs or big bits of responsibility.
Yeah, that's a massive task, 120.
Yeah.
good God. Don't know how else to say that.
It was really fun.
Yeah, well done. So what are some of the qualities an RA, research assistant, would need to do a good job?
One thing is the ability to understand what your boss needs, which, if you have a good boss, they're able to articulate that really clearly and give you a clear sort of set of tasks. Sometimes, though, you need to, not be shy and ask for clarification and sort of anticipate where this would fit within a bigger picture. So a bit of insight into the broader kind of aim of the work. A lot of time people are helping with doing lit reviews, so the ability to search databases, identify the appropriate literature, and even sometimes summarise the key areas of literature. So I've done RA work before where I was just hired for like a very short number of hours because someone was going to write a paper and they wanted to know the literature they should be working on from.
And that's enormously helpful.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm sure it would be.
Yeah, for sure. It's like there's so much to read, and I mean, you as the person you're working for would draw particular conclusions from the work.
Yeah.
But just to have someone to go through that in an informed way, and just to cut the wheat from the chaff, as they say, is just invaluable.
Yeah.
So you guys do an amazing job. So,
So that's certainly another skill set, is that ability to really figure out what the key pieces of research are in a particular field and that are related to a particular topic, and maybe draw out the kind of main arguments within the field, which is a great skill to have in a PhD generally, because, you know, we all have to learn to do that. That's certainly a good skill. Sometimes research assistants do lots of odd jobs. I found that really fun.
Yeah.
Some people can find that a bit boring.
What sort of jobs did you do?
Oh, I don't know, like if there's a conference being organised, you might help organise a conference, run a seminar series, do advertising. I bet these days more RAs are perhaps helping with social media aspects of dissemination of research findings.
Yep. I see that a lot on grant applications that I've reviewed. A lot of emphasis on social media and someone just pumping out the finding as you go along and building interest in it. So it's a very critical role. Absolutely, and it's one of the key factors in how likely your research is going to be used by the people who you want to use it, is if they're actually aware of the research along the way and get to have some kind of investment in it, especially even if they're actually partners or whatever. But even without that, if you're kind of building a conversation around a topic, it means that you can be having that conversation as you do the research. So even though you might not be presenting findings per se, you're kind of starting a conversation, and I think social media can be a really important part of that. And it's wonderful to have someone who has a role to do that, because often people that are maybe the lead investigator on the project don't have time for that, and they have their own social media stuff to manage as well. Or some of the professors might not have a lot of experience with social media. So I don't know about you, but I joined Twitter a few years ago. I have 31 followers. Well, there you go. You probably have thousands. But But I joined Twitter because I kind of feel like it's expected of the sort of next generation of academics. I absolutely agree. So I was much more than LinkedIn or anything like that. But I decided actually moving forward, I need to be able to know how this works. And in fact, I've found it's a really interesting way to network. It's really unexpected, but you know, I'm following all these people who I've referenced in my thesis, or you know, scholars I really admire, and I'm getting to know them as people because they're tweeting about current events and and you it's still very much about my topic, not sort of, you know, I went to the tennis. I think that people on Twitter don't tend to do that. Well, certainly when when I use it as an academic, watching how other people use it, trying to learn how to use it effectively. It's just that lovely ability to just say to someone, I love what you've done. This other person is doing this in a couple of characters, and then they reply back and they follow you, and you've been introduced then not only to them but to other people that they're following and researching and commenting on. So it really does bring the community, the worldwide community of scholars together, you know, step by step. I've been very impressed by the way it works. Yeah, I definitely feel much more connected with the international research community because of that social media function. So a big important thing for an RA to have a skill set in, I think, social media management. Another big skill set that I've used a lot as an RA is using NVivo. Now, I don't know if everyone listening here is social research, but in certain kinds of social research, NVivo is a very useful tool
for managing a lot of qualitative data. So if you do interviews and then you transcribe them, this is a piece of software that allows you to code them by themes, and especially in such a big project as that one I was describing with 120 young people with 5 years of data. It was a really complex project, and NVivo was the system we used to manage all that different data. So I always encourage other PhD students, or now that I've finished, new PhD students, that they should learn to use something like NVivo during their PhD, because it's a great time to experiment.
And when you're a student, you've got support to learn how to use it.
Exactly. Yep. There is classes to take. There's heaps of online training available. In fact, NVivo has great, I sound like I'm spruiking that software in particular, but it's got great inbuilt tutorials and stuff. So I found that one was quite easy to upskill in.
It seems to be the
but it
only
also
one that people
has meant I get hired.
Yeah. Well, that's
so,
it.
So, you know,
and
it's definitely worth finding out about it by using it for your own PhD. So.
And it does seem to be the standard program. Like I can't identify any others, because that's the only one that I've heard about and that we've had students use. So
yeah, I think it's pretty much the main one. There's quite a few other ones that are a lot smaller. Some of them are the freeware, so it means that they're more attractive for students who want to just use a software that they'll always be able to use. NVivo is a little bit limited, because if you want to use it, you have to use it on a university computer. You know, there are some kind of technical issues that make it a bit harder to transport around.
Sure, so you really should try to learn how to use it when you're a student, when you've got access to university computers. Sure.
Otherwise you'd have to buy it. Who wants to do that?
Yeah, that's right. And that's right. Don't let university buy that. That's good. Fantastic. Yeah, and I suppose you know, when I've worked with RAs, I am a dreadful supervisor, because I don't maintain enough contact with them. I just think, especially if they're in, I think I'll do the right thing. I'll take someone on who's a PhD student who hasn't worked as an RA before, and you know, we'll just help them along, and then I get busy and I abandon them, and they feel like they don't know what to do. So
that is a bit tricky. Actually.
So any advice for an RA who has someone like me to deal with?
Just bang on your door. Sometimes you have to be a bit pushy. I mean, this is true when you're doing a PhD as well. Sometimes I don't know about in your case, but supervisors, PhD supervisors, as well as people running projects. I mean, university staff are just very busy. And you're not going to be helpful to the person if you don't know what you're doing, and you take it in the wrong direction. And I'm sure I've done that, you know, thought I'm not getting, you know, access to the supervisor to get input, so I'll just kind of run with it for a bit, which is great, initiative, you know, getting things done. But sometimes it meant I went down the wrong path, you know, did a few bits of work that actually weren't what they wanted and had to redo it, and you know, that's always frustrating. So sometimes you learn by mistake, but sometimes you just also learn to really knock the door down. So I really need to just, even if I've known people who just you know, you don't want to say the word stalk, but they hang around the hallways because it's the only way to grab hold of someone. Like, I just really need to know, you know, do you need this by Friday or?
Well, that's what I say to the people I work with. I said often what will happen is I will think that I've told you or explained to you what it is to do, and because the person might be a new RA, they might not quite understand it, or they might want to make sure they're doing the right thing because they're so conscientious. Whereas with a more experienced RA, I don't have to worry about that as much. So I kind of forget there's that line sometimes. And so I say, if you're part of your job, my lovely RA, is to harass me. If you don't hear from me, I want you to come and email and email me 5 times in a day, because you know, if we get 70 emails a day, 70 phone calls a day, these things fall off the radar. So being a little bit forward, a little bit brave about coming along and giving us a bit of a shake up is a good thing, I find.
And I'm really bad at that still. That's probably my difficult.
Well, you have fantastic people you work under.
I've got some other skills as well, so that's all right. But I'm really bad at harassing people, and it's something I still need to get better at, because I'm not an RA anymore, and I'm doing postdoc. But even in workplaces, you know, you're collaborating with people who are really busy. And sometimes you really need to just harass them a bit. There was quite a big thing recently where I sent something to someone to review. I kind of didn't want their input, so I didn't harass them, but actually I really should have, because then their input came very late and there was a lot of really panicky last minute changes to a significant piece of work. So I should have harassed them.
Well, you were a martyr at the end about it, from the sounds of it anyway. But I think it is that. I mean, it's deadline blindness in a sense, because you know, perhaps your academic is focused so much on the deadline, they think I'll deal with this other smaller issue later on, not realising that issue is getting bigger. So yeah, we do need a bit of training sometimes. I think so.
Because you've got to be a bit easy on yourself.
Oh, thank you.
Academic life is not straightforward.
That's it. You're going to be the most popular postdoctoral fellow in the world now. She's kind to us. We love her. Fantastic. And so, advantages and disadvantages of doing postdoc work or RA work. How did you impact on your own career, publications, research?
I think it's a great work to get into if you really want to become an academic. Absolutely. It's given me a whole lot of research skills. In my case, I was an RA for 5 years before I did a PhD, so I was like really unusual situation, but I could tell when I was doing my PhD how much more expert knowledge I had, partly about the topic, but also what to do about things. You know, I'd already done 4 ethics applications and, you know, all those sorts of things. So it's definitely worth it if you really want to get into research more. And so I learned heaps of skills. As I was talking about before, you developed up the networks, got to know my field a lot better. So yeah, lots of good outcomes, and yes, publications. I did assist, in all my research projects I've done some kind of written publication, whether it be a report or an academic article, even if I'm not the lead, but in quite a lot of cases I was the lead on at least 1 or 2 pieces of work. So I learned a lot doing that, of course, as well. I only get better at writing from writing.
Yeah,
so
true.
That's been really great from a career point of view to have, you know, these are now several years old. You know, they were published before I did the PhD even. So that's a great kind of advantage. The disadvantages are, well, I don't know. I'd like your opinion about this actually. I don't have a lot of teaching experience. And I think if I really want to get a permanent job in academia, it's really teaching that gets you those jobs. So, you know, sometimes now I think, look, I'm in a really good position in some ways on my CV. Got those publications, got a whole lot of research experience, but I'm a bit sick of research. 13 years now straight. I'd really like to do some things that don't require writing up constantly and, you know, a bit more people talking. That'd be nice. But I don't have enough teaching experience really to get me those lectureship positions. And I mean, I'm just kind of figuring out what I'd like to do next anyway. But as a sort of general piece of advice, you know, have a kind of view to what you might want next. Often you might not know, but RA work definitely good. But also the teaching work can be good too. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, with your skill around these wicked problems, and you know, really, you know, pressing current issues that are often part of courses. For instance, in our media intro to media unit, we have a week on refugees. Traditionally, I don't think, I'm assuming we still do. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for you to lecture in that too. So, I mean, that would often you'd be very comfortable with that anyway, because you would have done presentations as part of your RA work. So it shouldn't be difficult for someone who's a postdoc fellow and or an RA who's doing a lot of research to step into teaching, just grabbing it where you can, I suppose.
And I've done heaps of guest lectures and I did a bit of tutoring in my PhD, but it's that kind of being responsible for a subject, those kinds of things.
Convening and
I
managing.
think everyone's in this situation of grappling with ongoing work insecurity. So post-PhD is it's not a straightforward period for most people. A lot of people will spend several years, probably at least 5, working in short-term contract jobs until they kind of build up their experience. And I mean, and a lot of people don't choose to stay in academia. Not everyone can. There's certainly not enough kind of lectureship jobs compared to the number of people doing PhDs. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is probably the majority of PhDs go on to work in other fields. What we've been talking about is kind of how to kind of get the experience for an academic kind of career. But my experiences as a researcher means I'd be probably really well placed to get research work in other kinds of organisations.
Like NGOs,
exactly.
United Nations, UNESCO, you'll have to fill the letters in, the
Human Rights Council.
Yeah, the HNREF, refugee.
Oh yes, the
sorry.
Palestinian group. I can't remember that. Cool.
That's right. You do. I've probably got the letters wrong in the acronym. And look, that's fantastic. So some really good advice here. So what you just mentioned towards the end too is particularly interesting for someone who's weighing up what sort of postdoc fellowship they could get or would be interested in. Perhaps something with a teaching component is a good idea to keep you in touch with those skills and to let you network and develop a portfolio and student feedback too.
Absolutely.
Because this is always a big problem when you're research heavy. You don't necessarily have a lot of student feedback to present if you're wanting a lecturing job or a teaching job.
And also it's really good for me to remind myself, this sounds terrible, how much I've learnt, and sort of my contact with students, although it's been very limited, always reminds me where a lot of people are at. And given what I work on is a very kind of topical issue, everyone's got some kind of vague idea of boat people and policy and stuff. I think we shouldn't underestimate, and you would have more experience than me, I guess, of how much students teach us about the way our expert knowledge translates to the wider population. Things like that. So I really miss that when I don't get to talk to students. And
Wonderful. Well, you do amazing work. You really do, and we're very lucky to have you at Swinburne and very fortunate to have you talking to us today. So thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for listening. We hope that you have gleaned many insights, as I have, from Robyn's conversation with us today. Thank you.
This has been a Swinburne production.